A little over a year ago, my head was swimming with thoughts about WoW. Laments for the many problems it had, comparisons I couldn't help but make to other MMOs that had been frequenting at the time, some of them better than WoW, and others had some things that were nicer than WoW. So what did I do with these thoughts? Well, I sat in my chair, turned on my camera, and I dumped it all into the laziest, sloppiest video imaginable for 48 minutes. But a lot's changed since then, not just in the game and my thoughts on what should be done to it, but also with my desire to make a video that's not such an unwatchable mess as that one was. So, given all that, why don't we take another stab at this? Now don't you worry, you don't have to sit through that whole shit show of a video to continue where I left off. Everything I went over there will also be covered here. I'll make sure of it for your sake. But to start this video off, I want to say that, honestly, whatever they do, WoW could really use a reboot of some kind. Oh, WoW 2, if you will. The ideal scenario would be to end WoW's stories and make a new standalone, probably single-player Warcraft game, and then make WoW 2 based on the stories and characters of that game, just like World of Warcraft did with Warcraft 3. The World Soul Saga sounds like it's doing the first step of that, finally addressing long-standing plot lines WoW has set up for itself, like the Sword. So it's possible that they could be following this route, and some of the ideas in this video are things that are more likely for WoW 2 than current retail WoW. But to keep things simple, I'm just going to treat the two like they're the same thing. Alright, so let's start with all the things that have changed over the last year or so. I wanted them to add a system for account-wide progression. Other MMOs have had features similar to this for years now, but finally, we're actually getting a flagship feature to market in War Within. Now, I'm not just talking about account-wide reputations and expansion feature unlocks, etc., although we are getting that lately, but here, let me use an example. While I don't know or honestly care if it was the first game to do this, my first experience with it, and probably my favorite, was in Star Wars: The Old Republic. They had a system full of account-wide unlocks for your accomplishments, use of certain races on any faction or class if you level that race to max, limited use of iconic class abilities account-wide for leveling that class to max, even a legacy tree to establish where your characters exist canonically with each other. Why? Just because it's cool. Now this is a lot of stuff that the keen eye might notice is not mentioned to be part of the Warbands feature coming to War Within. But during that reveal, Blizzard made it clear that they don't really know themselves what form Warbands will take as we move forward through the World Soul Saga. So consider this my take on what it should grow into. Now, of course, some things like the account-wide class abilities might be a little bit of a stretch for how differently WoW works from the Old Republic, but this may be a way for them to ease up on race class restrictions like I've been proposing since the old wishlist. Opening a class up to all races once you hit max level with it on your account is well within reason to be a feature of Warbands, and it also serve in Blizzard's favor since it could encourage race swaps after getting class to max level. Likewise for racial themed hairstyles, colors, or even to get a little wacky with it for another item from the old wish list, postures and animations of other races to be used on any other of your choosing after you've played a character of that race to max level. In addition, with the overhaul to the login screen tied to the Warbands feature, they could even give us the option to customize the character select screen, change it from a camp to a tavern, for example, and unlock options for it like racial city backdrops for character leveling milestones and more based on your accomplishments. Now this next one, you're gonna have to really trust me here when I say this. In between the last wishlist video and the War Within reveal, I jotted down in my little notepad doc, account bank. Coming fresh from the experience I had playing Guild Wars 2 where they went apeshit with account-wide storage, I yearned for WoW to do something similar, to create an account-wide bank storage system, and maybe even an account-wide gold pool like Guild Wars 2 does. And then what happened but not even a month later? BlizzCon happened, and they revealed the Warband Bank that not only allows depositing of any warbound or unbound items to be claimed by other characters, but also the ability to deposit and withdraw gold. Now the gold part is the thing I'm still kind of scratching my head about. It's great, don't get me wrong, massive improvement, big dubs, love it, great. But what I wanted was an account-wide gold pool. So here's my one big hope for the Warband Bank. If anyone at Blizzard sees this, please allow my character to just dump all their gold into the Warband Bank and make purchases from vendors, auctions, and trades to draw gold from that gold pool in the bank. Some kind of system that allows me to effectively have an account-wide gold pool like in Guild Wars 2, as long as I remember to deposit any new gold earned into the bank when I have the chance. And you know how people have been asking for player housing for like fucking forever? Well, what if we added them as a Warbands feature? Homes that you buy and are accessible to all characters in your warband as well as any player you invite, all regardless of faction. And in a shocking turn of events, my image for the ideal housing system doesn't come from Guild Wars 2. It's actually from Star Wars: The Old Republic. SWTOR's housing system was similarly legacy-bound, and all characters on your account can access your purchased home and its amenities, while other players can be invited with certain permission levels to access or edit as the owner sees fit. Furniture, utilities, and of course trophies that are obtained through your travels can all be placed throughout to personalize your home, create a custom private hub, and display your accomplishments to others. While ultimately it's hard to recommend trying SWTOR as it falls short in far too many other ways, I think it's important to recognize when a bad game does good things. When you do that, you can make good games even better by leveraging these overlooked strengths in a better overall experience. While 3 years ago, I figured this next feature would never happen, lately Blizzard has been slowly proving me wrong. I proposed a form of cross-faction play via the party sync feature that was added in BFA, which in short is a tool for scaling a higher level player down in levels and quest progress in order to play alongside a lower level friend. But since then, Blizzard has actually been implementing a ton of cross-faction capabilities, including cross-faction pre-made groups and guilds, but they've stayed stubborn on cross-faction anytime it comes to queued content or open world. So on that front, I think my idea of faction sync is still relevant as a solution to this issue, allowing people who join the same group with someone from the opposite faction to click the party sync button and have their character be treated by the game as a member of the party leader's faction, just as it treats them as the same level as the leader in regular party sync. This solves the cross-faction open world content obviously by letting sync players pick up and complete opposite faction quests and use cities until sync is stopped, and the queued content barrier by preventing unsynced players from queuing cross-faction without the help of a friend from that faction. If the goal is to keep cross-faction play opt-out as much as possible, then I really think this is the best way to fix the issue of playing cross-faction with a friend while overstepping this intention as little as possible. Another confirmed feature for my wish list is dynamic flight. I asked for them to bring that to other mount types and other zones, and that's exactly what they're gonna do with the War Within pre-patch. But what if they did more? It's kind of an open secret at this point. Hell, it's not even really a secret at all. That Blizzard's big inspiration for dragon riding came from the Griffin and Skyscale mounts from Guild Wars 2. The fact was that Blizzard's old mounts were merely a means to an end, getting from one point to the other. They weren't exciting, they weren't fun. Yet this is something Guild Wars 2's mounts managed to overcome. Traveling on a mount in Guild Wars 2 is, in and of itself, fun, but it wasn't just the 2 flying mounts that did it. The ground mounts too were dynamic and interesting to utilize for unique world traversal. Gaining and losing momentum on sloped ground, using momentum to catch air on ramped terrain, drifting to turn at high speeds, and yet, these ground mounts have the same problem that the game's flying mounts have. Their functionalities are split across all the different mounts available. Blizzard has a chance to do the same thing with Guild Wars 2's ground mounts that they did with their flying mounts. Take the idea and streamline it into something more flexible and easier to get into. Roll all these disparate dynamic ground mount features into one package to be used for all ground-based mounts. And you're gonna have to take another big leap of faith that I did in fact call it beforehand because I didn't manage to get this video out before this happened, but it would seem, based on some data mined assets, that this is exactly what they're gonna do next. Man, it really kinda just feels like Blizzard is looking directly at my script as I write this. Hold on.
This is where I'd put an
antivirus sponsored ad.
if I had one.
And while we're still on the subject of mounts, they could also drag in framework from the dragon mount customization in the druid form or warlock pet customizations added via the barbershop to add in customization for racial mounts as well as paladin steeds, which currently feel spotty with older races using ugly, outdated mount models, while others have spiffy new steed variations that look fantastic. They could take this opportunity to not only restore and revamp the older mount models, but also allow paladins to change the species and color of their steed. Swap out a horse for a ram or blue out for green. With all the additional customizations other classes have been getting, I feel like this would be a very reasonable next step. Honestly, I'll be surprised if we don't get features like this going forward. Now, Guild Wars 2 is also a lot better than WoW when it comes to having open world content for Endgame, a problem that Blizzard's also admitted to in the last BlizzCon panel for WoW with the announcement of Delphs.
We've had some stuff for outdoor world players to dabble in, but if you wanted progression, if you wanted goals, if you wanted a deeper, more structured experience, frankly, we were letting you down.
This could very well mean an end to open world content being neglected as a branch of gameplay at Endgame, but even if delves end up being amazing, I still hope they don't lean solely on them for open world Endgame. One of the great appeals of open world is freedom. Having a larger variety of things to do besides delves is important to the idea of Endgame being available to open world players. So, in the spirit of that, I really hope they continue to expand on world events they've dabbled in recently. While in their current state, I haven't really heard all that much positive sentiment about them, the idea reminds me of events from Guild Wars 2. Events there are introduced early on in the leveling experience, but at Endgame, they evolve into a much more engaging form called meta events. These meta events are basically a role-agnostic open raids at massive zone-wide scale. Uncapped scaling player count consisting of progressive chain of events culminating in an epic boss fight at the end where your final reward depends on how much of the meta event you participated in. Now, WoW's events technically follow the same format as Guild Wars 2's meta events, but I think the problem is that they're too low-key. To give a WoW example to explain this, let's take a look at the Super Bloom in the Emerald Dream. It's a chain of events leading to a finale with a boss that has rewards at the end. Yeah, that's what we're looking for format-wise. But imagine if every 2 Super Blooms, the third one is replaced with a massive zone-wide event where Farrak and Druids of the Flame take over the whole zone from the raid portal to the Dream Warden's camp, and everyone in the zone needs to rally to take it back. A multi-tiered progression where everyone first breaks the siege at a single objective, then has to split up across 3 other paths and progress further when all 3 subgroups have reached their checkpoint. Then they can all move on until they converge again at the raid entrance, where they summon a huge magma giant or even a randomized final boss for the grand finale. After defeating it, people get actual endgame quality rewards, even with chances for gear depending on how much they contributed and how quickly the event was completed. That is what meta events in Guild Wars 2 are like, and that's what I'm talking about when I say WoW needs to do something similar. Anyhow, not to be turning this whole video into an ad for Guild Wars 2, I did suggest previously also that they attempt a new evergreen version of Torghast using the lessons they learned from Torghast. While it isn't really evergreen like I proposed, we did get the Scaravolts in Dragonflight, which seemed like an alternate take on Torghast. I'm hoping we either get a third iteration that carries over across future expansions and exists in the base game world for expansion agnostic access, or the concept in general becomes a consistent branch of the endgame experience with a new, equivalent roguish dungeon happening every expansion. I think the long-running mystery mill of the unused Karazhan crypts would be the absolute perfect setting for just such a feature. It's placed in the open world, accessible to all, and being part of Karazhan has insane potential for mind-bending architecture, twists, and variety that can be built upon for years to come. Another thing that was recently confirmed to be an upcoming feature is the Old World Revamp. They've announced at BlizzCon that they plan over the course of the World Soul Saga to progressively update the old world by featuring primary expansion content in it. The only specifics that they've confirmed though is a revamp of Quel'Thalas coming during the release of the second expansion in the saga, Midnight. We don't have any confirmation for what else they might do before or after that expansion's release. It's entirely possible we could get 1 or 2 post-release patches for War Within, and even more likewise for Midnight, but I have no insider information here, so take this as nothing more than speculation. Fingers crossed though, right? Alright, now, look, I know it's not a feat of clairvoyance to be one of the many people who suggested WoW stealing the idea of trusts from Final Fantasy XIV, but honestly, while practically everyone was suggesting the idea, a part of me didn't actually think they'd do it. Lo and behold though, with a recent update we've got follower dungeons which are basically trusts, only you don't decide the party you're given and it automatically builds it based on your role. The catch is that, unlike Final Fantasy XIV, WoW features a lot of its main story in its raid content, so to experience the whole story for an older tier of content, you'll have a smooth experience using follower dungeons to wrap up stories for dungeons, but when it's time to see the story for that tier's raid, well now you've got a problem. Currently, what WoW does for this as a solution is that they let you continue the story without completing the raid, and allow you to watch the raid's ending cinematic through dialogue option while picking up the next quest. But you weren't there. You didn't get to be a part of that moment. Now surely we're bound to get follower dungeons expanded to more and more different expansions of dungeons, but the dungeons are still active through leveling, while the stories for the expansions are still all concluded in a raid. Where this system will be most effectively utilized is through old raids. I think what they gotta do with follower dungeons is take the framework and use it to add follower raids, where currently every raid tier unlocks the easier LFR mode for the raid weeks after the normal modes come out. They should make follower raids become available after the next raid tiers come out, so that after everyone has abandoned the old raid, players can still play through it with NPCs to get the story if they fell behind and missed it. Which, by the way, is another massive problem with World of Warcraft. See, when you play WoW, you're never playing World of Warcraft, not entirely anyways. You're playing whatever the most recent expansion, hell, not even that. You're playing whatever the most recent patch tier of the current expansion was released. Not only does every expansion raise the level cap, invalidating every piece of content that was previously relevant, but every single update for WoW that adds new content, Blizzard rewards more powerful gear for completing that content, and avenues for obtaining catch-up gear to bring new and returning players up to the current tier. This makes everything from the same expansion that existed before functionally irrelevant in the gameplay loop of the current patch, since there are much better rewards available from the new stuff. Now, this has been happening for so long in the genre that very few people even recognize it as being an issue, and I was among them for the longest time. Until I played, that's right, Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 does something special in the MMO genre. It fixes that very problem by bucking this self-cannibalistic MMO trend. Every expansion release does not raise the level cap, and every content patch does not release more powerful gear. The same dungeons from the original release are still not only doable just the same as they were at release, but they're still active because the rewards remain just as relevant as they were before. Every time they release a new dungeon, strike, raid, event, crafting pattern, whatever, it only serves to build upon the existing game. It adds another option with different stat combinations, appearances, and any other effects you can imagine being on gear that I'm forgetting. Any legendary gear you acquire remains legendary, and your progress towards obtaining them can be continued on in the new tier, though that term doesn't really apply to Guild Wars 2. If you're a player who pushes yourself into the high difficulties of content, you don't need to re-climb through all the difficulties like you do with WoW every single time a patch comes out. You can go into the new content at the same difficulty you were playing at before that patch release. Your accomplishments aren't invalidated every couple months by the latest update, and you don't play new content to be a slave to the gear treadmill. You play it because you're excited to do the content and to try out the new gear combinations or collect the new appearances. So yeah, you get the idea. Everything in Guild Wars 2 is evergreen content, but WoW, on the other hand, has this problem ingrained into its DNA. So how do you adapt something as wildly different as Guild Wars 2 gearing into WoW? Okay, well, let's take this one step at a time. The first thing Blizzard needs to do as soon as possible is to stop raising the level cap every expansion, right now, and structure the quest rewards for future expansions around endgame progression rather than leveling. Unfortunately, War Within seems to be raising the level cap once again, so we're not going to be seeing this change in the next year or so. But if you start there, the rest of this gets a lot easier. First, you stop the level cap bumps, and then you stop the new patch gear cap bumps. Organize the levels of gear into a new format. One where the normal difficulty of, let's use Dragonflight as an example, Vault of the Incarnates, rewards the same item level gear as a Mirjasil normal difficulty, but it's a lower item level than Mythic gear for either raid, and a Mythic Mirjasil and Vault of the Incarnates are both equal in level. With this change, you'll also need to lower drop rates for gear significantly to avoid people getting permanently max geared too quickly. But that would serve an extra purpose of making gear drops feel more rewarding, so I think they should just do that anyways. Once you do this, you've successfully stopped the bleeding, and everything you add from that point on will remain for the rest of the game's life. There's also a massive issue with the way endgame content in general is designed nowadays at its core, and this isn't exclusive to raiding either. Raids are designed around the Waster World first instead of your average raider. Mythic Dungeons are designed around Mythic Dungeon Invitational and min-maxed M+ speedrunners instead of people who just want their endgame to be done in the smaller scale dungeon content. And PvP is designed around arena competition instead of large-scale battlegrounds where MMOs inherently shine in their PvP scenes. In the interest of time, since this video is already crossing into hour-long territory, I'll spare the details in this particular case since the subject's already been thoroughly covered by others in the community. So instead, I'll refer you to basically any Asmongold video that has a title like this, since his take on the matter is almost an exact mirror of my own. After that, the older parts of the game can start to heal, and there's probably lots of different ways you can handle that. The method that would be simplest for the player would be the hardest for the developers, and that would be to remove chromie time. But there'd be a bit more to it than that. You need to establish something, probably old world zones, as the de facto leveling path. Rework all the other content that you used to use Chromie time to access, scale it up to max level, rework the rewards based on endgame progression, and establish a main quest route using the shielded icon system they use nowadays. This would create a result much more like how Guild Wars 2 works, which, assuming you've been watching all of this video without skipping, you'd think I'd be like, fuck yeah, do this. But I'm gonna pull the plot twist on you here. Not only do I think Blizzard would never do this due to all the work it'd take to implement, but I actually don't want them to do this, because there's another option that I think would be even better. You keep Chromie time. Keep the ability to choose how you level, which is a cool thing WoW has that's unique from other MMOs. You take all the heroic and above difficulty dungeons and all the normal and above raids and rework those to be max level content with reworked max level rewards, like wherever a set bonus relies on a class mechanic or ability that doesn't exist anymore, you fix that so they apply to modern class design. Any of those dungeons that don't have a heroic or higher option, they'll have to add it in for them, because the last thing I want them doing is to be taking the normal dungeons away from levelers as an option. In fact, I want them to give levelers more options. In Endgame, if you're a raider, you can, well, do raids. They've always been an Endgame thing. If you're a dungeon player, you can now do Mythic Plus dungeons. And coming soon next expansion, if you're an open world player, you'll have delves to play at Endgame. Meanwhile, during leveling, if you're an open world player, obviously you have quests. If you're a dungeon player, you have the Dungeon Finder. But if you're a raider, you have nothing. So why don't we give them something? Where I suggested they give dungeons a heroic option just a minute ago, I think likewise they should give Raid Finder mode to any raid that doesn't have one. But, hey, shut up, stop typing that angry comment. But you don't make Raid Finder mode max level. You take the Raid Finder modes for all non-current expansions and make them scale to low-level players just like dungeons do. Add a Raid Finder for leveling so that people who prefer raiding as their mode of play can level their alts through raiding, and new players can have the option to introduce them to raiding while they level so they can learn it before it starts getting more intense at endgame. And while we're at it, why not add a full expansion shuffle to the random Dungeon Finder too? The option clearly exists in the code anyway, since the Dungeon Finder always asks if I want to use it when the queue's taking too long. And on the subject of leveling, there's one massive lesson WoW needs to learn, not from any other MMO, but from WoW itself. Ever since the launch of Classic WoW basically, Retail WoW has paled in comparison to its Classic counterpart in terms of popularity. People seem to like Classic WoW more than Retail. But why though? Now there's tons of reasons, and sure, plenty of them can be chalked up to nostalgia or masochism, but the biggest thing that I think does it isn't that at all. Having tried it myself, it's, well, just how significant everything feels. Unlike Retail, Classic doesn't rush and push you to max level to play the newest and fanciest content. The act of leveling up a character is an accomplishment that takes time and feels rewarding, while also challenging you at least enough to make you learn how to play your class effectively. Now, Retail is taking a shining to adding more and more class complexity, which, unlike the other bald WoW guy, I don't think it's as big of a problem as it seems. While yeah, I agree, some more simplicity in that regard would be a good thing, I think the real problem is that people get all the way to level 60 without ever learning how their class works, because they simply don't have to. With the additional class complexity present in Retail WoW, it's even more important that you have the chance to learn how to play those classes while leveling in an environment where there's less at stake for failure. And yet, Retail has made it so failure is impossible, so people don't learn when they're playing wrong. Classic, on the other hand, provides an experience where failure to know how your class works can get you killed if even a couple other regular mobs join the fight. Proffessions actually give you a noticeable edge in gameplay, and several challenging obstacles are placed in your path that encourage you to try grouping with other players. It teaches you to utilize so many different facets of the game while also providing a more satisfying experience for overcoming its obstacles. Two important benefits that are completely absent from Retail. So I think the scaling and reward structure for Retail's leveling needs to be completely overhauled. Enemies need to be harder so that mindless smashing gets punished. Gear from quests needs to be more sparsely scattered so even a random drop or profession craft could prove useful. And XP gains from everything need to be reduced dramatically. And the last thing that's been recently fully confirmed from my bag of tricks, well, sort of at least, is some of the new class stuff. Now they're not doing 4th specs like I thought, but they're doing something I think is even better. Hero talents are an idea that reskins abilities for existing specs and provides some additional modifiers to how they play. It's less impactful on gameplay than a 4th spec, which honestly, I think is a good thing, while at the same time, it allows them to provide more hero specs due to their simplicity. Each class is getting, like 3 hero specs to go with them, and many of these fill the fantasies of things I proposed. Magic Archer, as a new class, was the way I proposed adding Dark Rangers to the game, but now Dark Ranger can and will be a hero specialization. It's a shame that this means we can't have a Divine or Arcane themed Magic Archer, but mayhaps one day in the far-flung future, more hero specs can be added and something like those can see the light of day. On the other hand, though, we had Tinkers from my list, which are not something they can just reskin a class with and we're good to go. So the status on this wishlist item is still purely in the theoretical. On that note, my old idea still stands. I think it should be a special hero class that's unlocked after reaching max engineering level for any expansion. Ultimately, the details are all up to Blizzard, but if I'm trying to think about what a Tinker is that isn't already covered by the engineering profession, it would be mech suits, which would be a sick tank spec by the way, and robot arms, which would be a cool multitask spec that can use 2 skills at the same time. Maybe that's all they need and it can be a 2-spec class like Demon Hunter. Now before the hero talents reveal, I'd also put together a big list of things I had ideas for as 4th specs for existing classes, which are all pretty much on the way or on the table for a future hero spec idea. The Monk Blade Master spec is likely to be just what the Shadowpan spec will be, but they haven't shown off what it is exactly, so basically just speculation, though it would make sense to just change things like Tiger Palm into Tiger Strike that uses your weapon as an animation. Clerics were another idea I had as a form of bringing an official Holy Caster DPS spec, similar to Shakadin builds that have cropped up throughout the game's history. There's an extremely high likelihood between all the different hero specs for Paladin and Priest like Oracle, Archon, Lightsmith, Herald of the Sun, that one of these could be very much like this Cleric idea I cooked up. While Paladins have always traditionally been a melee-focused class, Shakadins have always been a thing that crops up, sometimes even intentionally by Blizzard despite this. On the other hand, there's the thought of Necromancer being a Warlock spec, which is arguably a bit of a strange ground to tread since Necromancy is basically already what a Death Knight does. Yet, Death Knight has always inherently been a melee spec with supplemental Necromancy, not a Necromancer caster. While again, Warlock is one of the many classes they haven't showcased the hero specs for yet, so all we have to go off is spec names. That said, we have something called Soul Harvester as a Warlock spec coming up soon. So if one of these is gonna be a Necromancer, and that's of course if one of them is gonna be a Necromancer, then we can probably expect it to be this one. And while none of this is certain to begin with, since all of what I've said with these old ideas are purely based on spec names and nothing else, we shall continue to dive further and further from the realm of certainty. I came up with this wild idea for a rogue spec that does not dual wield like all the others. A duelist, or fencer spec if you will. Of all the shit I've come up with in this section of the video, this sounds like the most ridiculous, but when you think about how would this work, it honestly just kind of falls right into place. All it is rogue, playing like it always does, but with some passives that make it beneficial to drop the offhand weapon and stick to strengthening a one-handed playstyle. The perfect basis for a hero spec. Shit man, anyone who remembers in Classic, rogues didn't even have the ability to dual wield until level 10 originally. And I also just want to point out, we got no fucking clue what the hell Fatebound means. So I don't know man, maybe, you know. Now let me move on to a couple very important matters that have been a cancer eating away at the core of the experience for well over a decade now. First is WoW's moderation. It's been increasingly worse lately, but you want to know a secret? People have been cheating in WoW for decades with no consequences. Just ask Asmon about it. He could tell you about all the people he knew who just straight up cheated. Casually using bots, using RMT, even getting reported for it, and nothing ever happened. And the stories seem kinda crazy, right? It's just a secondhand account, so how trustworthy can it be? So let me use my own example. I've been playing retail lately and catching up on a lot of what I missed because I got hooked up by a friend and it came with 30 days of game time. The bots are fucking out of control. There are so many bots, they travel in literal flocks, practically blocking out the sun in the sky, flying around gathering materials to sell. You couldn't even conceivably report all of them unless you want to spend all of your time playing to do so. Meanwhile, in Classic, you can see bots just straight up fly hacking through the air in plain sight with no consequences. And we're supposed to believe that Blizzard can do nothing about this? I don't buy it, man. How can private servers manage to fix it with a comparatively microscopic budget, yet one of the wealthiest AAA game devs in the world can't? Nah, man. Do better, Blizzard. The next is about a cold war being fought behind the scenes of WoW, and the game's quality has been caught in the crossfire. This war has been between WoW's game developers and its add-on developers. See, Blizzard will make content. They decide to be lax and let people make add-ons for the game pretty freely. So, people would start making add-ons that help them beat the content easier, more clearly point out mechanics that they might wipe to. Then Blizzard sees people beating raids easier, so they bump up the difficulty to compensate for the people who are playing with the assistance of add-ons. Then the add-on devs make more in-depth add-ons to handle the more complicated mechanics, and Blizzard makes more complicated mechanics to handle the new add-ons, and this continued for a decade. Until you get to the point where we are now with modern raiding, where the endgame mechanics are so obtuse and hard to read that if you aren't basically being a tool-assisted raider with add-ons that'll help you avoid mechanics, you're gonna have an absolutely miserable time. If not due to the raid itself, then due to the people who haze you for not using add-ons. Oftentimes, deadly boss mods or weak auras, or hell, even both or more, are a requirement for some raiding guilds. Now, I've fallen off the high-end raiding scene because of this, so I don't really have the experience to say firsthand, but I've heard praise for Dragonflight's raiding scene in this regard, and what I have seen myself is good progress. Raider.io? Yeah, there's an in-game Mythic Plus rating now that doesn't need an add-on. Mechanics? Well, I've seen a lot more intuitive concepts, but there's still lots that aren't. This will never be solved at its core unless they take an action that some might consider a bit drastic. They need to take a harder stance on add-ons and ban some more of them. The ones that read and respond to mechanics, of course, obviously, things like deadly boss mods and weak auras, and while I don't think they should totally ban weak auras, I think they should, and I expect them to, neuter some functions of it, such as reading gameplay mechanics like boss and class skills. And WoW still suffers a lot from its mechanic telegraphing, since they've never focused on making them readable for the gameplay, because everyone just uses add-ons to read them. So instead, they focus on making them look stylish and artistic. Unless you're already familiar with the mechanics, it can be hard to tell what the limits are between what is considered inside a telegraph versus outside of one, because of the artistic flair that softens the edge of the effects area. It wouldn't be that hard to edit these telegraphs for readability and still have them be stylish. It mainly just needs a circle with a hard edge that clearly shows the boundary between hit versus miss, which is colored and styled based on its function rather than the ability's color like the swirly bit is. And with the increasingly massive amount of skills and abilities each class has, the damage numbers themselves, while stylish and satisfying, are so incredibly cluttered that it can be hard to see what's happening underneath them, much less what numbers are actually popping up on your screen and what caused them. Without a damage meter add-on, it can be hard to even tell if you're doing good damage, since so many numbers show up and overlap and drown each other out, it's completely unreadable. Add-ons do exist to change the delivery of the numbers, with abbreviated large numbers, shrinking smaller numbers, embiggening larger numbers and crits, ability icons next to the numbers, and so on and on and on. But come on now. We can't just let add-ons fix everything. Blizzard needs to rework the game's default delivery of damage numbers with some additional options. Some of the stuff that's possible with add-ons would be fantastic, but even when I use all of these, the numbers can still be a bit cluttered to tell what's causing what. So also adding some features that add-ons can't accomplish would be huge, like combining numbers from single source of damage into one number, incrementing as it ticks forward, rather than each tick of damage being a separate number. But it's not just the combat they need to rein in the add-on superiority for. If you've ever been an auction house goblin in any form of WoW, you probably have an add-on like TSM, Auctionator, Auctioneer, or some other auction house assist add-on that gives you access to all kinds of power user statistics and data to game the economy to the highest potential. Guys, this is a video game. Maybe you ought to do some real stock trading if you're this hard into the WoW auction house. But anyways, these kinds of power tools being an add-on are kind of economically unfair, which, yeah, I get it, that's a free market for you, but in a video game meant to be played for enjoyment, either these tools need to be taken away or given to everyone as a standard auction house feature, like an advanced tab or something. Either way, these tools existing as an add-on is a big problem that gets overshadowed by the admittedly more important issue of combat, but it is, nonetheless, an issue which is caused by the same problem. So I'm worried that if they tighten up add-on restrictions, it'll be focused only on combat mechanics and will ignore the auction house, which also needs attention. Now there's a slew of other smaller things that I think they should integrate as base game features, but I already covered those in another video where I talked about my UI setup, so you can check that one for more esoteric details. But there's one thing I didn't cover in that video that you're not going to see coming, because it's an add-on I didn't even know about until I did some research on the issue. Other MMOs have systems for playing instruments with a full digital keyboard for actually playing music in the game, or in some cases also playing MIDI files through the in-game instruments. WoW is lacking this, but what if I told you that someone actually managed to make an add-on that does all of that? So yeah, of course, this is a proof of concept that makes me wonder why this hasn't been added to the base game yet, when it's such a fun feature in other MMOs. People have often toyed with the idea of a bard in WoW, and it comes up a lot as an idea for a class, but I think that's a terrible idea. Not the idea of a bard, but as a class. Bard should be added, but as a new secondary profession instead of a class. One that doesn't take up any of your slots and sits alongside fishing, cooking, and archaeology. Well, okay, fishing and cooking since Blizzard forgot about archaeology. I think it'd be really neat to have trainers in all kinds of different zones that'll teach you different instruments that are native to the culture of the city where you learn it. Like learning how to play drums from Orgrimmar, flutes from Bendaria, or some crazier stuff like electric guitar from the Darkmoon Fair. And another popular feature from other MMOs is armor dyes. Now, I'm gonna be realistic here. I'm just not so sure armor dyes are possible with the way WoW's armor appearances are programmed. Don't get me wrong, I still want this in WoW. Hell, I need this. So many transmogs are so close to fitting with my set, but the colors are just slightly off, and it makes the piece unusable. Unfortunately, I just don't see it happening on a technical level. But there's a lot about WoW that we used to think was impossible with the engine, but it got changed anyways. So, just in case I'm wrong, how should they make this work? Inscription. That profession has been having an identity crisis ever since it was implemented. It used to be used for glyphs, but then that system got scrapped. It used to provide vellums, but then they gave those out at vendors. And ever since it lost those primary functions, its purpose has changed to all different kinds of things over several expansions, and struggled to find a permanent evergreen form of relevance. Dyes are how they can finally overcome this. It's the perfect product for a scribe to provide to players that will always be relevant. And it doesn't have to be exclusive to scribes either. Lots of endgame gear uses recoloring as a form of giving different difficulty variations of the same gear a new look. A way for dyes to not invalidate that is to have these different colorations unlock their color palettes for use in the dye system. Now as for the dyeing process itself, once again trying to think within the bounds of what I've seen the game capable of, the current transmog window has a little extra square under your weapons for transmogging a cosmetic enchant effect over your weapon. Now I don't know how this game works under the hood, but maybe this framework can be used on all the armor slots as well to give each slot a dye option where you pick the smaller box under the slot to choose which dye to apply to it, like with the weapon enchants. And doing so will raise the gold cost of that transmog. As for the dyes themselves, while I'd love to have an in-depth primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary color customization like Guild Wars 2, I really don't think WoW's engine is set up to support that at all. Hell, I think we should thank our lucky stars if we ever get armor dyes in the first place with how it handles its textures. So I think a more reasonable thing to expect would be color swatches like we see in other MMOs like Star Wars: The Old Republic. Specific combinations of primary, secondary, etc. color palettes that, when applied to gear, fill the primary color in with whatever the swatch has as its primary color, the secondary with whatever the swatch has as its secondary, and so on, however many colors the swatch has. This would bring the relevance of color palettes from endgame recolors up to a point where they have actual value and aren't entirely pointless in the face of scribe dyes. When everyone talks about professions in WoW, it's the crafting professions that people really talk about. Gathering is an afterthought, usually only taken either as a support profession for their main crafting, or by people who don't know what professions they want and just decide to gather as much as they can to sell in the auction house. These people, however, will miss out on things like the new crafting work orders added in Dragonflight. Once again, Guild Wars 2 has provided me the answer to this. See, in Guild Wars 2, there's no such thing as gathering professions. You just gather things if you have the tools to do so. This frees people up to always have the chance to pick a real crafting profession. But unlike Guild Wars 2, WoW is kind of built with these gathering professions baked into its gameplay formula, especially so now that gathering professions have their own skill trees. So how do we get around this? Well, I think there's a pretty easy solution that'll do the trick. The simplest way would be to make them all secondary professions so they don't take up a profession slot but still need to be picked up from a trainer and can be leveled up with the new profession skill trees just the same as before. So I'll have the minimal disruptance on the existing game, as people who already have a gathering profession will still have it. This ease of access to node gathering will also bring other crafting professions more in balance with tailoring and enchanting, which don't require a gathering profession to acquire their materials. Now there's one last major thing on my magical list of wonders, but it's kind of a big subject that lots of WoW fans don't like to hear for some reason, so before we get to that, got a bunch of smaller, more esoteric things to talk about first to soften you up while you all prepare yourselves emotionally. Throughout the course of Legion, we received incremental updates to combat animations, starting with melee animations, then moving on to spellcasting animations, and don't get me wrong, these were extremely welcome. Everything they updated there looks great and set a basis for any future ability animations, but they left behind a few strong sore spots. Of particular note is ranged weapons. Hunters are in an extremely goofy looking place with their ability animations. All skills using bows and guns use the exact same animation, the basic, regular, schmegula firing animation. Now I've heard the argument in defense of this so often is, how many ways can you fire a bow or gun? Well, if you'd played anything besides WoW, you'd realize at least this many ways. And that's not the only thing the animations are forgetting. While melee skills got a massive visual upgrade in Legion, they neglected the basic stances and attacks for many melee weapon types, particularly two-handed axes and maces, as well as one-handed thrusting swords, to use Soul's terminology. That's things like rapiers, which are swords specialized for thrusts and stabs, to the detriment of their cutting and slashing ability. The animations for these three weapon types are made in a way that makes sense for a regular cutting sword and are passable for most one-handers. But when they're used for these long-hafted two-handers or one-handed thrusting swords, they really don't make much sense, and it looks awkward and unbalanced at the best of times and blatantly ineffective and useless at the worst. All the while, animations already exist in-game that would fit for both of these. The long-hafted two-handers that currently use sword animations can, and have used polearm animations, despite being a mace, which you can see by using the Silver Hand Holy Paladin artifact. So clearly, the framework for replacing these animations is there. They just need to set up more two-handed axes and maces to use it. And as for one-handed thrusting animations, that already exists in, well, daggers. There's no reason I can't see that they can't override the animation for thrusting swords with the dagger animation set in the same way that the Silver Hand uses polearm animations. Furthermore, another aspect of combat animations they've neglected since Legion is the movement. Another aspect I'll add that they clearly have the framework for, as it was a big visual polish feature of Demon Hunters. I predicted after Legion that they'd use that framework to overhaul all combat movement animations eventually, so that it just works with all weapon types and all classes, but I was wrong, and it seems instead like they kinda just forgot about it. So, I suppose this is just my reminder to you that WoW is visually behind the game on this, and almost every other modern MMO I can think of does this already, and has done this for years. So let's get this as a thing in WoW already. Demon Hunters proved we can have it. This next idea didn't actually hit my radar until the War Within reveal happened at BlizzCon. I was eyeing some of those Arathi armor sets that showed up in the middle of the presentation. As a Paladin main and a fan of traditional knight aesthetics, my eye was drawn to this one right here. I wasn't thinking, I just saw that and was like, God damn, that plate set's looking fucking sick, I need this! But that was not the plate set. This is the plate set. Once my brain kicked in, I was heartbroken. It's the perfect set for a paladin with a knight aesthetic, but you know who that's for? It's for hunters, shamans, and dragons? So this got me looking not just at the rest of the armors in this image, but also through the Transmog menu in-game, and I started to realize just how many pieces do this kind of shit. Mail that looks like plate armor, of course, but also leather pieces that would look great on a hunter with hoods and cloaks perfect for a ranger, and cloth pieces that are literally pirate outfits which you can't get in leather. And with all the armor class agnostic appearances in the game nowadays, I see no problem besides the logistics of letting each class transmog one armor class below or above their own. Plate classes having access to mail transmogs, mail having leather mogs, leather having cloth, and cloth having leather. As the expansions have gone by and new races get added, they've started getting cooler and cooler racial abilities that make the old ones everyone else has seem kind of boring by comparison. We're at the point now where the newest race, Drakthir, can just fucking fly. It's something that isn't actually that good when you think about how easy it is to just use them out, but it's something that's so much cooler just thematically than all the other racials. So at some point, I'd hope they'd consider sort of giving another pass to the racials for older races, more specifically considering the idea of a traversal racial for each race. Like, humans could get gallantry or something that allows mounted combat on any owned ground mounts in the open world, and disables dazed dismounting for an hour once a day. Kinda like those old Legion class hall mounts you would research back then. Maybe the ancient scrapped concept of planes running can come back in the form of some passive version that uses the upcoming dynamic ground mount physics and accelerates the longer you move without turning. I came up with a ton of concepts for every single race, but in the interest of time, I'll just scroll them along on the screen so you can read them if you want a better idea for what I'm talking about. But for now, it's time to get to the big one. WoW's subscription-based model is one that's fallen out of date a long time ago. Now, for everyone who defaults to the argument of, oh, it's just $15, don't be so upset. Listen carefully here, because I'm going to deep dive here and fully explain how much of a reductive argument that is. The cost of playing WoW is absolutely insane, and I did all the math on this a long time ago in my old wishlist video, but I'm going to do it again with modern timetables and costs. So the first price you pay is the base expansion. Now, at the time of the last video, this was a minimum $40. But the price of the base edition has actually gone up now to $50. The maximum, meanwhile, is $90 for the Epic Edition, but let's be fair and point out that this one comes with 30 days of subscription time, so let's knock that off the cost since you would need to pay for one additional month when you buy any other package. So now, unlike last time, let's go down both sides of this pricing model. The cheapest combo like last time, and the most expensive. So going on the cheap end, the most value per year of sub will see you discounted down to $13 a month. While on the expensive side, you're looking at a recurring monthly sub at the familiar $15 a month. Last video, we assumed a time gap based on historical expansion lifetimes that was reasonable. Since they've announced that one of their big goals with the upcoming saga of expansions is a faster release cadence, we can assume this time frame will actually be shorter. We assumed a 2-year gap last time, so this time we'll assume a 1.5 years, since I don't see a world where they can actually manage a yearly release for full expansions. So on the cheap end, we want to play through the whole course of the expansion, so we take the $13 monthly fee over 18 months to get our $234. And we add the $50 base price onto this and get a bare minimum price tag of $284 to fully play just one of these expansions. Now this is actually lower than the result we got last time, but remember, we're assuming a shorter time gap now, so this is less cost for less time. We're still looking at 4.5 times the price of the base purchase, which, by the way, has gone up since last video. Now let's look at the more expensive side. We take the monthly recurring at $15 a month over 18 months and get $270, plus the Epic Edition price of $75, and we get $345. Now, a huge and honestly respectable argument in favor of a subscription model is that it keeps more intrusive and overt monetization away to deliver a premium, high-quality experience funded by all the players who pay the subscription. Understandable. Only one problem. That's not the subscription model WoW uses. WoW's model wants to have its cake and eat it too. They charge for the base game, they charge for the sub, but then they also charge for server transfers, level boosts, faction swaps, race swaps, name changes, guild services, mounts, pets, transmogs, toys, even gold via WoW tokens. There's a word for this. It's called microtransactions. Little thing that not a lot of people have heard about these days, so you might not be familiar with it. It's the very thing that premium subscriptions promise to keep out of the game. You can go and compare the monetization of other free-to-play MMOs to WoW's and see that they do all of the same monetization tactics, only they don't charge a sub on top of it. WoW has become a free-to-play game without the free. Now, there's a sneaky little wicked genius here on Blizzard's part. Yeah, you can get these subscriptions that sneak up on you by recurring automatically, and these cosmetics so you can get the monkey brain, ooh, shiny, 1 impulse purchases, but then you have the WoW token. A feature that, on the surface, appears magnanimous. Being able to spend gold in game to trade for a month of subscription time, or even trade in for $15 worth of store balance? Sounds great. Now personally, I do like this. It's nice for using some spare in-game gold to save some real-life money. But let's not pretend this is a purely charitable feature, because let's look at how this feature works by following the money trail to its source. So, you have gold and want money. You go to the auction house and you buy a WoW token. Whether you turn that into subtime or Blizzard balance, either way, it goes into Blizzard's services. But who put that on the auction house to begin with? Well, that would be a player who had money and wanted more gold. While you received $15 to give to Blizzard, the person who listed that token to begin with paid $20 to Blizzard to do so. And then that $15 you received, the only place you can spend it at is Blizzard's store. So it's just going to be returned to Blizzard along with the extra $5 of the original purchase sent them. So in the end, a WoW token sub is worth $20 a month at the end of the money trail, and every store purchase made with WoW token money is marked up by that extra 33%. Yeah, Blizzard loves when you use the WoW token to buy things. So, let's plug this into the calculation for the most expensive price plan. We take this $20 recurred monthly for 17 months plus the one $15 a month sub you get with the Epic Edition, then add the Epic Edition's cost of $75, and this plan will send Blizzard $430 for a single expansion. So, in summary, the cost to play a single expansion comes out to $284 at the barest minimum, while on the higher end it could cost $430 and then some once you factor store purchases into account. We want to talk about why WoW is struggling to attract new players? Sure, we can make some great points as to why the gameplay itself isn't attracting new blood, and you'd be absolutely correct. But if you want to get real, this is the biggest reason. Add on top of that the pressure of getting your money's worth out of each month of subscription. The sub commoditizes the time you spend on the game, even if you let someone else pay for you through the WoW token, because then you got to make sure you do enough farming to get together enough gold to maintain that sub and have enough to spend for yourself. Something's got to give with this monetization, and I think it's the subscription. Much as you like, you can argue against the microtransactions that have been getting more and more prevalent in WoW, but the reality of business is that they're going to be able to make a lot more money off of the microtransactions than the subscription. Meanwhile, removing microtransactions would just cut off an avenue of revenue directly, while cutting off the sub would bring a ton more people into the Blizzard economy to spend their money by removing a huge barrier to entry. But I don't just come to you with empty platitudes. I bring to the table ideas. First off, I want to make my view on this clear, since Asmon's view on this is that Classic should be free and retail on a sub, so that's going to be an opinion shared by a lot of people. From a certain standpoint, I can see where he's coming from. Classic's an older game, some things in that version of the game haven't aged all that well, so making people pay to get the more up-to-date game seems like the play in that sense. But I argue the opposite should happen. For one, of course, there's crazy amounts of monetization in retail that aren't present in Classic. Yeah, there's the hot topic of the WoW token making its way to Wrath Classic, but there's no in-game store for Classic WoW, and the other versions of Classic don't have the WoW token. So I think it's the version of WoW that's being monetized like a free-to-play game that should be the one to go free to play. Plus, Classic WoW is a version of the game that, among other points I talked about earlier, also sells on nostalgia. There are so many people who defend the subscription model without considering the factors that have changed since the original release of WoW, using points that are invalidated by the existence of retail's extended monetization. These kinds of people are, I don't want to use the word majority, but they're a large chunk of the people who choose to play Classic over retail. So, I don't think we should take that away from them, because when you look at their arguments in the context of Classic, they're absolutely right. If you took away the subscription required to play Classic, it would open up a justification in Blizzard's eyes to start creeping more monetization into Classic, which would kill a huge chunk of its popularity among the crowd who choose it over retail because of the premium game service they're currently getting for their $15 a month. So, that being said, I think whatever they do here, they should do to retail. Shall we just scrub the subscription completely from the game then? No. See, there's another option here that some other MMOs use, ESO and SWTOR being among those that I've seen and played personally, where access to the game is free, but there's also an optional bonus subscription that comes with additional benefits. These can include a number of different things, like a monthly stipend of store credit to accumulate, a higher cap on how much gold or credits you can carry per character, more profession slots, bank space, character slots, access to rested XP, easier access to new expansions, whether free or discounted, and additional armor die capabilities. The list probably goes on, but that's what I've seen in the 2 examples I've given. Hell, Old Republic even has a preferred status, which eases a lot of these restrictions if you've previously spent money on the game. For WoW, this could be set up in such a way that for those who preferred the subscription model and continue their subscription, the game experience is completely unchanged from before, and they get some extra store credit and cheaper expansions to boot. And the last thing I want to point out is the discussions I've seen around WoW coming to Game Pass. The thing about this y'all gotta realize though is that while this would be cool, Game Pass is a cheaper subscription than WoW. If they offered this as an option, nobody would just pay for a WoW subscription when they could get it through Game Pass and have all of its benefits included. If WoW's sub is to be included with Game Pass, the price of it would have to be dropped at least below what Game Pass costs, which would be a significant price drop from what it's currently at now, and what other free-to-play MMOs charge for their optional subs. Not to say that I and tons of other people don't think this would be fantastic, but come on man, there's no way they would ever be willing to drop the price that much. It's as the saying goes, if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. Lately though, with how many wishes have come true for WoW, who's to say what's impossible? Certainly not me. But it's healthy to keep your expectations realistic. Let me know in the comments what ideas you have for WoW that you think would be impactful towards fixing it. I love hearing these kinds of ideas, and a lot of the ideas I've had myself come from conversations like that.